Thank you guys again for coming out today. Really with the part of the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act, we've talked about it a bunch of times throughout this year, and I've been providing information, sending out newsletters. Eric sends you guys all kinds of stuff. We've got a webpage with more information. The Safe Streets and Roads for All is really a big one that we think is a good one to have this type of presentation, get some good information out there. I think it can touch on a lot of communities. It's not one of the more unique ones that's really project specific. We think this can be, reach all throughout the two counties. And most importantly, it gives us an excuse to bring you guys in for some cookies and some pizza, which the staff appreciates. We like to snap on it afterwards. So stick around afterwards. If you didn't see it on the flyer, we got pizza coming. Help yourself to some cookies, water, drinks, whatnot. So really what we want to talk about today, again, the Safe Streets and Roads for All. Grant and Emil here, they'll both talk and give some more detail, Grant specifically to our safety plan and how we're going to work to upgrade that and what it entails. Emil will talk more about the Safe Streets for All program, kind of the ins and outs, eligibilities, dollar values available, whatnot. So again, part of the bipartisan infrastructure law, we'll refer to that as bill, IIJA, all kind of interchangeable. A few things about the SS4A program specifically, $5 billion available over 5 years. And that's upwards of $1 billion available in 2022. So with this application coming up, deadline of September 15th, you can go one of two routes. You can go for an action plan grant, or you can go for an implementation grant. Again, Emil will touch on those specifics a little bit more, but essentially implementation grants are your construction projects. That's where you're going, asking for dollars to upgrade the sidewalks, to do some lane configurations, whatnot. The issue there is a minimum ask of $5 million, plus a 20% local match to that. When we were talking internally a few months back, we didn't feel like we could get to a point to have a good application in the fall for an implementation grant and get enough locals on board with that 20% match. It didn't really feel worth it. So what we're doing then is going the action plan grant route. What this is smaller dollar amounts, and it's kind of used a couple different ways. For MPOs, for communities who don't have an action plan at all, you can request these funds to start from scratch and develop an action plan. For us, ours is, I'd say it's complete. We could check all the boxes today, but I think we can upgrade it. We can do it better. There's a few of those boxes that aren't great checks. They're kind of, yeah, we can justify that, but we'd like to do it better. So what we want to do is apply for this action plan grant. Again, Grant will talk about it a little bit. I keep saying grants, and grant, it becomes difficult. He'll talk about it a little bit more. What we want to do is get ours up to date, add some to it. And then a really cool aspect of it is you can, with those dollars, you can bring some people on board and look at specific stuff. Whether our communities, we get feedback and, hey, we really want to look at sidewalks here. We really want to look at speed studies here. We can use some of those funds to do those smaller studies. We can't start to do design work for a project, but we can start to look at it a little bit more detail. Stuff that we can't take on internally. So this allows us to do a little bit more. So I'll let these guys, talk about it a little bit more. The big thing to touch on, and, we're kind of anticipating some questions and thoughts are going around. Can the MPO apply? Yes, certainly. Even to the implementation grant aspect. Can all of you apply? Yes, certainly. The asterisk there is through all the webinars, through all the emails, all the discussions we've had, there's really a push for regional collaboratization. I maybe said that word completely wrong because it didn't sound right in my head. Working together, all of us working together and having one big plan to do everything at once rather than this person applying, this person applying, this person applying. Now US DOT is going to look and say, man, this area doesn't have anything going on. They don't know what they're doing. So we've been successful in the past working together, having one big application on stuff. And that's really what we want to work towards here. We want to upgrade our plan, do more, get feedback from everybody. We anticipate over the next 6 to 8 months to have another get together like this, maybe two, questionnaires, here's what we're thinking, here's what we want to go through with our plan. Help us provide that feedback. You know, some of the stuff that we're doing today, but a little bit more detail. And then again, into the fall of 2023, now we have this study, now we can point to it, we've looked at other stuff. Now we can all work together and, hey, here's our $5 million ask with 7 locals who are committed to the project. So I'll turn it over to Emil, let him touch more detail on the Safe Streets for All program. Really kind of casual here. If there's any questions throughout, if there's questions while we're talking, feel free to raise your hand, interrupt. We want it to be a back and forth and be interactive for everybody. So, Emil, go ahead.
Thanks, Stephen. I'm Emil Wisniewski, Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act Coordinator for Eastgate. I'm just going to go over some of the basics from the Notice of Funding Opportunity that was released earlier this summer. So the Safe Streets and Roads for All program, referred to as SS4A, was established with the new Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or IIJA. As Stephen said, this is a sizable program, $5 billion total over 5 years, easy math, $1 billion a year. This is for regional, local, and tribal initiatives. It's not for statewide grants or state agencies. And that was intentional by DOT. They wanted a program that was available strictly to regions, locals, just because there was a lot of state formula funding throughout the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And this is all about meeting the goal of 0 deaths and serious injuries on the nation's roadways for all users, not just motorized vehicles, but transit, bicycle, pedestrian. So this initial round is up to $1 billion available this year. The applications are due September 15th. So as Stephen mentioned, we are working towards an action plan grant update. As far as individual project awards, planning grants can be up to $1 million for a political subdivision and up to $5 million for MPOs. Our grant request will be significantly smaller than those numbers because we feel we have a good starting point, but there's some different things that we have to update that Grant will go over in his discussion. But they did say explicitly in the NOFO that there's hundreds of planning grants anticipated nationwide. On the implementation side, it is a $5 million minimum ask, so that's pretty sizable. So if you're doing the math, that's a $1.25 million 20% local match, so that's sizable and it's going to restrict, who applies there, up to a $30 million request. They anticipate 100 grant awards potentially nationwide on the implementation side. So when we talk about project types, planning, what we'll be chasing here at Eastgate in Mahoning and Trumbull counties is to develop and, in our case, update a comprehensive safety action plan. And there's also some supplemental plan activities allowed. So I'll talk about those in a second. Implementation, this again, you have to have a completed safety action plan. And Grant will talk about the specifics. I don't believe we have anybody in the region that's got anything of this scale and detail, but if you have any questions, if your plan, would meet those criteria, feel free to follow up with us. But this would include your traditional, preliminary engineering, environmental NEPA work, and detailed design, as well as the physical capital construction. So when we talk about supplemental action plan activities, this is an important piece for what we're doing because we anticipate using some amount of Eastgate staff time as an in-kind match, 20% contribution, and then using the funds we receive to do some of the supplemental action plan activities. So that means flesh out and identify some projects, some corridors, some countermeasures that we feel are most appropriate and score highest as far as rate of return, and start to think about how we can program those into projects for future implementation requirements. So when we talk about a supplemental activity, it could be updated analysis, expanded data evaluation, quick feasibility studies that don't rise to the level of preliminary engineering, stakeholder engagement, collaboration, talking to locals to see some of those underserved communities that might not be represented traditionally for these requests. Equity assessments, there's a huge push here for the Justice 40 initiative and to serve those historically underserved communities. And things such as traffic calming, accessibility plans, public health plans are all part of this. So again, big takeaway is we're trying to tee up projects for funding requests next fall so we come back and get capital running. We want shovels in the ground. As Stephen alluded to, eligible applicants, metropolitan planning organizations, we have a higher threshold for these. Counties, cities, towns, all can apply, transit agencies. If you listen to the webinars, though, there's a lot of people from different cities, and some of them large cities that, ask questions, hey, can I apply as a large city or as neighboring communities? And the response was pretty consistent across all these. We're really looking for projects of regional impact. So you're not prohibited from applying, but we're hoping that a regional project with both counties will score highly and then position us to show, hey, these are the projects that were identified as the highest impact across two counties rather than the highest impact within a single township or municipality. Required match 20%. Sometimes this gets waived in other programs for rural communities or underserved communities. No exceptions here. It's a hard 20%. As I mentioned, we'd be using it in kind to chip away at that a little bit. So talk a little bit about program priorities. Promote safety, that's a pretty obvious one. Low cost, high impact strategies, high rate return, and over a wide geographic area. Again, that regional emphasis. Big push for equitable investment, underserved communities. These could be areas of persistent poverty, areas with high minority populations, isolated rural communities. All would be looked highly upon here in this application. And when we look at that mapping that DOT has updated with the bipartisan infrastructure law, we see a lot of those census tracts along the Mahoning River corridor, particularly in our urban cores in Youngstown and Warren, Niles as well, but there's also some in rural areas. Hubbard has one. So it's not just a downtown type of address, it's scattered amongst our region. So these are all areas that we're going to look at and Grant will talk about as far as putting an equity lens on this. Evidence-based strategies. This is pretty consistent with what the plan already does, what the FAST Act required and what we do for ODOT highway safety funding applications. So having a data-driven approach. And then just alignment with DOT general priorities as far as equity, climate change mitigation, job creation, economic competitiveness, the kind of stuff you've seen in the RAISE, BUILD, and TIGER programs over the years. Those are some other factors they'll consider. Specifically on how our action plan application is going to be scored, there's three main areas: safety impact, and again, the emphasis on serious crash reduction, fatality reduction, and ideally elimination. Equity is going to be criteria number 2. Again, reducing crashes that are severe and fatal in those underserved communities and census tracts. And the third is additional safety considerations. These are spelled out to be wider geographic area, public-private stakeholder engagement. So what we're doing here is a first step. And then innovation in these countermeasures. An additional consideration is listed as the budget costs. So they are looking to see how much bang for their buck they can get. We think we're going to be especially competitive here because we're going to come in lean and show that we don't want to redo what we've already done. We want to build on it and then position ourselves to implement, which is what they really want to see in this. Looking ahead a little bit to how the implementation grants. So when we come back in a year with our plan in place, hopefully funded, they are saying that underserved communities will be considered as part of the application, and a higher percentage of funding in those underserved communities will be viewed favorably by DOT. So not explicitly scored higher, but probably helps move us up a tier in the review process. So just to recap here, before Grant takes over to get into some of what's going to go into the funding plan update, we are busy starting to prepare and finalize this application. We will be seeking letters of support from our regional partners. So this is a chance for you, and Steve and our team will provide a template as a starter kit, but we would love for you to customize these letters a bit. Tell us about your particular community's safety needs, your agency's needs, especially if you have multimodal users, more than just vehicle crashes, but if people are walking, biking, using transit, these areas are dangerous. You're experiencing near misses or crashes on record. That's what we want to hear about, that unique story. It does help as we have a bundle of support letters to see some customization, some personal interest stories rather than a stock letter replicated 30 times. Certainly highlight any underserved communities where investment has not taken place historically over the years for different reasons. After we get those letters and finalize our application, we're going to hit submit here on the 15th. It'll take a few months for sure before they're able to review all these. But our hope is that we would secure funding in 2023 in time to begin our updates, get a consultant under board to help with some of these supplemental activities and project prioritization and identification, and then leverage the action plan to next fall when this second round of funding comes out to ask for construction and design. With that, I will turn it over to Grant.
All right, hello, everyone doesn't know me. My name is Grant Taylor. I am GIS specialist here, both data mapping and doing a lot of safety planning type stuff. So one thing I'll talk about, which some people know, is that we have a local road safety plan. We put this together in the last couple of years as part of a task order from ODOT. We had a consultant came in and helped us work on. Put it out about January of 2020. It is on our website, right in our safety section. So it's broken up in that document into a few categories. And introduction, it sets the stage. It goes into region-wide information, data about it, talks about, what the vehicle miles traveled are for the region, what the crash rate is for the region. There's a really great broad picture giving you information about the region. It goes into the existing conditions, which does a lot more detailed analysis, breaks down by crash type, showing what types of crashes are occurring where, does some different severity analysis, gets into hotspot analysis, showing where certain crashes are occurring more often, where the severe crashes are at. Next section falls up into emphasis areas, which are the priority focus areas. Throughout the organization of this document, we had a decent sized group of people that we had came in, met with, talked to, went through a bunch of stuff. We had 4 priority areas that came from that. It was impaired drivers, speed, distracted drivers, and intersection. Each side would be our 4 emphasis areas for our document. And each one of those then has additional analysis into each of those emphasis areas to help define the problem a lot more. Next section was an implementation and action plan section, which broke it up into infrastructure, enforcement, education, coordination, policy, and then it went through each of those emphasis areas, and it has suggestions, categories of things that can be done to improve these things, whether it's looking at data, looking at construction, if it's looking at policy, and looking at how we can change what's being done across the region or internally to figure out how to make the system safer within the categories. Then the final section was a priority location, which breaks out the intersections and segments with the formula that goes through, looks at the data for all these different things, and brings in what our priorities are for each county and lists 15 to 20 of each category for each county. So that was the document that was put together for the local road safety plan. But the big thing with this new program is they're looking for what they're calling comprehensive safety plan, which goes further into a lot more details and isn't just so focused on the safety at the engineering type stuff a lot. It brings in a lot of these other things. The one good thing, which I actually find interesting, is that the comprehensive safety plan doesn't have to be a specific document. It can actually be a collection of documents if you have a few different documents that tie it together. So what I'll show is a website actually that I've been working on to actually be essentially what would be our safety plan. So this is what we have been putting together, which is going to be basically almost like a hub for any safety related stuff for us to tie it all together in one organized database, and also allow a lot more bringing in individual data points that could be looked at more than just a static document, but while also still tying in a lot of the documents themselves so that we still do have accessibility options, but allowing paper and not requiring an internet connection to look at this stuff. So beyond just being the safety plan, looking a lot at trying to also make sure that it's a data information, not just a plan, but something that's interactive. So it does have some stuff like a contact, which click on that, it opens up email, sends me an email. A current road conditions, which click on it and it will bring up and give you OGO telling you about what the road conditions are in the area right now. So, and then right here, first thing you see, our local road safety plan document, the PDF is linked right there, which ties in all those different data points that we've already discussed. Big thing throughout a lot of this is for a comprehensive safety plan, they do have 9 different criteria. One criteria, really easy to knock out, has to have been done within the last 5 years, which luckily we're updating it, so it's still being kept relevant. One of the things is looking at a towards zero death goal throughout the region. One of the things that we do have as our the General Policy Board, have approved resolutions to support ODOT in their efforts going towards zero and having a 2% or 2% reduction across several different categories. So within that, we've got that being tied into that, and going to our performance measures, we've got information about that. We've actually got the resolution that was adopted right there, can be clicked on, viewed, along with bringing in, showing off the performance measures that are being looked at throughout this process. One of the other things is developing an action plan with committee, task force, implementation group brought together, which we did do. Information is documented in our local road safety plan, allowing us to take care of that. Next, third thing is you've got to be a data analysis, which if you go through our document right now, we've got a lot of different analysis pulling in data. We're looking at the hotspots, we're looking at how many crashes are occurring on individual sections of roads or intersections. We're bringing all that together and tying it together already. And next, one of the other things is the equity component, which, as Emil's pointed out, it's really, really big. Within Eastgate, we do a lot of equity stuff. It gets tied into everything that we are looking at. To meet the requirements of this, we did look at, we could do some basic equity analysis, try to put something together that'll go up on the website really quickly, meet that criteria, but it's one of the things actually we feel will be one of the best uses of being able to bring in consultants, bring in somebody that'll be able to do a more relevant look at equity within the region as opposed to just a data analysis. Looking at policies and guidelines, plans is another requirement, which we do have called out in our local road safety plan right now, where it goes in and talks about some of those policy things within our emphasis areas to look at. One of the things is a comprehensive set of project strategies and problems that we coming up with projects along with plans for how to deal with some of these priorities and stuff like that. So we have a high priority locations, which I mentioned in our plan. We've had a map up there, but this is the newer update we've been making to it, where this will go in. It shows off all of our high priority locations right now that we have on our list. Map, and zoom around, look at it. And it also has all the segments, the intersections over on the other side listed. And then under some of these, we've been going through and looking at the baseline data, what we've already got. What's the trends? And we're pulling out these intersections or segments that have some very specific problem that we've been able to call out to start putting that in as some of our action items, things that we think should be looked at. Not necessarily just this is a construction that needs done, but much more of trying, these are things we found there's a pattern. These are things that should be looked at or investigated or further plans should go into. Along with that, any of this stuff, click on, and we'll zoom into them. And then also there are PDF reports that have been put together for most of these intersections or segments that you can easily click on and pulls up and gives you information, maps, data analysis on every one of these locations already. One of the things that's also required is performance measures, which brought this up earlier when I was talking about our goals, but we started putting this out here. We need to have a way of reporting out performance measures. We started to put together just a little dashboard here that is showing off what ODOT is currently having us track that we're agreeing to. That's going to get built out a little bit further here in the next week or so. Also add in, so I wanted to make this more than just to meet the plan, but a little bit more of a hub. So also got a thing, I'll bring up Safe Routes to Schools program, information about that, links, and some extra data about that. Also have a mapping effort section, which goes in and details out all the different maps that I'm putting together for safety type stuff. You can go through and it'll be shown up on here and be found, easily downloaded. Brings up a lot of the points that they're looking for that we're looking at are stuff that's been put together that maybe hasn't been a published document so much. It's used internally, so this also helps to show off that we are actually doing a lot of this additional analysis behind everything. So that covers most of what we need to, where we're at. It's come down to laws. Some of the things like the equity needs to be expanded upon a lot more. And the priority list, we have a priority list. We'd like to see that get updated, expanded upon. Taking those steps, great thing that we'll be able to do internally and expanding a lot more on other people who have been brought up to us to be interested in. One thing about the action team being looked at is that there also is, they want you to have a group or team that is monitoring the data, monitoring what the results are, stuff like that. So I do have under here, under the performance measures, is a transportation safety review team, which I got right on here. It's going to be a link that people will be able to put their name and email address into that anyone can sign up to be part of. Also have over there, we have some forms that people are interested in. They can go ahead and sign up for it if they want to. Plan for this review team will end up meeting every June, July is going to do a recap of the past year. Going back through, looking at what the new data has come out. Presenting a TAC, the CAB. Also, we'll have it be something sent out or published online that will allow people to actually interact or comment or respond. Might be able to get some input back on this stuff. Final format, how that'll be done isn't quite there yet. I'm trying to figure out what that, and probably part of the planning process will be figuring out what the best format for that would be. It's going to be a completely optional thing. It's not going to be people have to sign up and they have to be involved. They'll be opening that forum. And then we'll still make sure there's going to be accessibility option for it. And then a lot of the help is also as we'll be able to look at as the data comes out. And whatever they comment might help us decide that one of our emphasis areas that we've been looking at may not be relevant. Now help us direct going forward that we need something else to look at, or where else we should look at, or project locations may come up. We'll be able to get a lot more input from people in general. So that covers about where our plan is at. Link for the website that I'm putting together is on our website under our safety. There is a link to it. It's still being updated a little bit, so if you have comments on it, feel free to let me know. I also do have my card over there by the sign-in sheets. Back to you.
Thanks, Grant. So what you mentioned with the safety action team, we do have the safety review team signups right here. Feel free to fill that out. That's kind of what we want from you guys initially. Again, like Grant mentioned with that, we're not asking you to come to a bunch of meetings. We're not asking you to do a bunch of work. It's your way of obtaining more information and being able to provide feedback if you so choose. It's a box that we have to check, and it's just a plus for you guys. So please sign up for that, or like Grant said on the webpage that was provided, we'll have a sign in there. So really, we want to, Pizza's going to be here in a few minutes, but we wanted to leave some time, and this is what we think is kind of the most beneficial part, is kind of some open discussion and questions. Just to kind of recap, these guys cover everything in detail way better than I can. But just to touch on it again, we're submitting September 15th for the action planning grant. Funds undecided, but like Emil said, much lower than those multi-million-dollar caps. So really what we're looking for is we have 25, 50 high priority locations that Grant mentioned, but is there stuff that's not on there that you guys think we should look at? Project areas, project ideas, whatever it may be. 1 second, Dean, and we got the board here. I think what we're going to do is now, and then, if you think of something while you're eating pizza, go ahead and write something else up on there. So yeah, go ahead. So For the initial funding, so Emil can touch on it a little bit more, but what he initially was thinking there is through Justin, we do our planning grant. We're almost thinking of this as a smaller version of our planning grant, really getting into some basics and like you mentioned, not any design work, correct?
Yeah, Dean, they're really looking for area-wide and really the area being regional. Corridors probably too micro level for that, for everything we've heard. We've heard some large cities, like the hundreds of thousands of people say, can I have a grant to look at a safety plan in my city? They're like, we'd really like you to look at a region. Urge you to talk to your partners. So I'd say corridor too specific. Still could probably apply, but again, I just think likelihood of funding very low.
Have you thought about like compiling a bunch of corridors together, like region wide as one to do one analysis for a grant submission? Like, is that part of the thinking here? Like, if we want to look at 224, 422, just start making a list of corridors that are region wide. Is that something that would be applicable?
Yeah, and that's kind of what we're looking for those thoughts now, and over the next 12 months into next fall of 2023 is what exactly is it that we want to apply for? Do we want to apply for a specific project type across the region? Do we want to look at a few different ones? So that's really the feedback that we're looking for is, you may say, hey, I think we should do it this way, really going into fall of 2023. So yes and no. We have some thoughts internally as to what we can get to, but that's kind of the whole point of this process. And then, the next 8 months or so, possibly having some additional discussions.
Okay.
Yeah, Gary.
This is just an assumption, so correct me if I'm wrong. So you guys are going to go forward with updating this plan. There's going to be public hearings that are committed to. If there's public meetings, this input could come out for corridors, intersections, sidewalks, whatever you want. That'll be included in the safety plan next year if you wind it out and submit that. And then will specific or individual communities be allowed to apply for the implementation dollars at that point for safety projects within those corridors, intersections, communities, et cetera?
So yes and no. Yes, in the sense of we would prefer in the direction we want to go. And again, emphasizing the fact that, from USDOT, from Federal Highway, really that emphasis on that regional project.
So even for implementation, you're saying?
Yes, for implementation. And that's the direction we want to go. And another thing that we didn't mention is they're really looking to go the planning route first, get the planning dollars to then lead you into implementation. So to answer your question in a roundabout way, yes, the communities could. We would prefer them to do it with a regional view. The difficulty becomes the $5 million, 20% matching to that, and meeting the safety plan. So there's a little bit of gray area there as far as what's required for the safety plan, and does Eastgate's MPO plan for the two counties, does that cover everybody to apply?
Well, that's what I want to make it specific enough that local communities could then apply for implementation dollars based on your safety action.
Right. We don't believe so. We don't believe that a community can apply themselves and reference our plan. There's no direct absolutely no or absolutely yes. The best thing that we can reference is there's a question for the communities. Can I use my MPO as a co-applicant referencing their plan? And for what Grant was mentioning earlier, we can only be on one application as an MPO. So we would not be able to, let's just fast forward hypothetical, we applied for $5 million for regional view next fall. We could not then also be a co-applicant on somebody else's saying, yes, here's our plan, we're co-applicant. We could support it. We can't.
But they wouldn't be able to reference your safety action.
We don't believe so. Not a definitive no, but we.
No, this is getting, we're really getting.
Gary, to follow up though, multiple communities could partner with Eastgate in a single regional application, each have their own local match for a series of projects in their community. communities
For an implementation.
for an implementation.
Right.
So it's not just we have to pick one community and work with them. It could be multiple corridors, intersections, and people could contribute their own matches. I mean, we're getting into the details ahead of ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it can work out the same way, and it just becomes one application rather than 2 or 3 or 4. Makes it look like we're doing, and we're showing that throughout this process now, that we're looking at it as a whole and kind of applying that way, so.
And they want to see fewer larger projects. The way to get to the larger project is they're using collaboration of.
Right.
You got a project, you've got a project, we just apply it to get the dollar value.
Right, and the other big thing that we've heard, through this and from other stuff as well is they always like how, if they're looking at an area, if they're looking at our area, there's one dot on there for an application. They're not looking at it and say, oh, you're competing amongst 4 of you. Now you're kind of all 4 look frowned upon rather than do it together, that one dot looks better.
Yeah, in theory, it could be a low-cost countermeasure that's replicated a lot of times throughout the region to get to that bigger dollar value. I don't want to say it's just one big project.
And, we've thrown the $5 million out there a bunch of times. That's just the minimum. We're not saying that next fall, we're only applying for $5 million. So if that's kind of a concern, if anybody's thinking, well, I got, I don't want communities to fill up to 5 million and I got $2 million worth of stuff I'm looking to do. There's no issue here. And, it's applying for the dollar amount that we think is correct. It's not just reaching that 5 million.
So a lot of what's been implied through going through a lot of their stuff has been that they want when you apply for an implementation grant is not necessarily project specific, but almost a theme, whatever it is that you're applying for. And then you can fill projects into that theme. It could be we could have something comes up out of the next year that, the pedestrians is a really big thing. Maybe there's sidewalks in 5 different communities that want to get expanded, and there's intersections for pedestrian crossing somewhere else that somebody has an interest in and comes up. And those are 2 separate types of projects, but that vulnerable pedestrians could be what we're looking at as our project, and they still would be able to sort of get grouped together into that category.
It's just a little bit of idea of the timeline. Talking about, you're going to turn this application in September 15th.
Correct.
What do you need from local communities before that deadline?
So before September 15th, and with that application, you don't really get into too many specifics as far as we want to do exactly this, exactly that. It's kind of vague there. But still, if there's a general consensus and there's, hey, we specifically want to look at this, and we hear that now, we can work that into the application narrative for the 15th. The big thing to get, and Abel touched on back there, was letters of support. If this is something that you think, I'll find it somewhere right here. If this is something that you do want to be a part of, you're all on board, providing that letter of support. And again, we can send out that template. I think we can probably turn something around and probably look for it in the tax summary email that comes out. Then we hit everybody, focusing on, hey, this is an area that we're all on board with this, and we want to look at this area this year. I think that'll really bolster our application on 15. From there, kind of waiting and seeing. Andrew said, hopefully early 2023 is when we hear about awards for funding. If that's the case, and whenever that may be, we would then turn that around and start to get more feedback on how we want to finalize our plan and what we want to do with the additional money then. So
Their application is somewhat complete now. So.
correct. We've been working on that, and if you want to throw a 75% complete, and we're certainly able to and willing to add in any emphasis areas that we want. It's only going to make our application look good.
How are you addressing the equity issue in the application? Surely that's more particular. How's that being addressed in the application at this point? It should be critical to getting the letters of support, I think, from those communities. And how do you see it as a key identified component of regional safety?
Yeah, so excellent question. For the purposes of this application, it's very brief compared to other DOTs. So instead of the 30-page Razor Bill Tiger narratives, we're down to 10 pages and have quite a few questions. So it's compact. What helps us is when DOT provided these updated interactive GIS maps of all the historically underserved, as they defined it, census tracts by income, mobility levels, access to personal vehicles, all those factors. Youngstown, Warren, and really urban core communities along the river in particular score very high there, and the map looks very advantageous in our favor. So a screen cap of that map will take up probably a quarter, half a page of the application. It'll be pretty visually striking. So
Can you prepare an overlay map? And you've got a lot of maps here, heat maps of where safety issues have been identified on top of the census tracts in Youngstown. That's what I could take to Mayor Brown and say, here's the issues as they affect our communities. These probably on the same corridor we're all talking about, but I need to be able to present the visual.
Yeah, I'm sure that's something that we can provide, when we start to get into that process on specifics. We do a lot with the census. It's all stuff that we already have.
To get a strong letter, I need to have strong evidence. This is what's going to be looked at. So it might help to just today, before the 15th.
So I think what Hunter's saying is if we got 3 or 4 locations in Youngstown, certainly shows up and highlights as an underserved area, let them know so when they write the letter of support, they can reference Lansdowne and Oak Street, they can reference Albert Street. I think that makes it.
Exactly. Bring it down to this
And we have all the communities.
This planning process will address these issues in our underserved communities.
Right, I think that's something we can turn around pretty quick. If you're kind of thinking, based off of Grant's high priority locations, and then kind of throwing that together and just having the census tracts, having the.
Safety plan, I think, well, you overlay the impacted census tracts. Here's where the problems are in Youngstown. Same thing in Warren, same thing in Niles. That would, I think, elicit much stronger support as to this is a planning process that will address concerns in our neighborhoods.
So,
Yes, yeah. That can be
Can I
done.
work with you on that?
Yeah, and one of the other big things we said is we want equity to be a bigger component than it already has been. That's going to be part of it for us also.
Yeah.
We're not just going to take what we've got in equity. We want this to be parts to be expanding on that,
Yeah.
looking at those regions a lot more.
Yeah,
Is there any consideration or impact to like any hypothetical projects that are being talked about being leveraged to the strength of this application at all? Since any corridor planning or expansion of transportation that would matter as far as making this application stronger, for instance, like TOD stuff or any of the existing other sidewalk projects and what have you that are planned out as far as like part of the narrative.
current stuff that's planned and.
Or hypothetically planned that might be able to bolster both of the 2 projects together, I guess.
They get referenced in there at all.
yeah, I think one of the big ones is the YES initiative, Youngstown Equitable Sustainable Streets. There's an earmark in the front of Sherrod Brown that he recommended to the Transportation Housing and Urban Development Subcommittee. We're waiting on final word on that, but that initiative would certainly tie in with this from the equity piece. I think our live zone project for the logistics innovation and vehicle electrification, it is a rural project. It is not in a disadvantaged census tract, but it has a micro-mobility and express transit route tie-in with WRTA. So again, it doesn't necessarily have to be a project in a historically underserved census tract, but it has to have a nexus. It has to have some kind of relation with it. So if we're working with reverse commute type of things to a greenfield sites, where we're getting low-income populations to job centers, that could qualify here for the equity piece. Those are just a couple that come off the top of my head.
Kind of a follow-up to Hunter's question about equity, and I encourage you to say, Grant, that you're certainly looking at really digging into equity more in depth than has been currently. Are there particular data points that you're looking at and thinking too about offering a letter of support if there's a connection to impact on community health? That makes it a little easier for me to write something. I also know that equity has been very central to the county health departments and the city health departments, community health improvement plan. So there's data that might be useful as you continue to work through equity. And there's a whole initiative specifically right now in Mahoning County, the Vibrant Valley Health Equity Project that is doing a lot of review of data specifically through an equity lens. So as you move forward, is there the opportunity to include some of that data that shows the impact of, something like this beyond kind of the obvious reduction of crashes, but, better support for public health and other connected things like that?
I think there's definitely a lot of potential there for doing a lot more stuff with that along with it. There's some of the stuff they recommended actually in supplemental where it's a health and equity assessments for regions and stuff like that. And I think is part of what this is here also is because of knowing that's stuff that people are going to be interested in. That's be able to try to look at it, how we can focus on some of those areas.
Yeah, and if you would include that in the letter of support, we'll certainly make sure things like that are bullets in how we're engaging the community. We'll list those specific initiatives that are relevant. Because that's, speaks to, having the level of preparedness to pull something like this off, the level of engagement. The other thing was like food deserts. USDA has pretty good mapping on that. Quite a bit of Youngstown qualifies as a food desert. So if we overlay those, it starts to build a bigger case and a better case for them.
Yes.
I think the answer to this is no, but can you confirm if you were to take like a group of safety studies that have already been underway, say to be for miles 422, Glenwood Avenue, and for Mahoning County, maybe something, Bridge Street, Struthers, whatever it might be. If those were already underway or completed, would there be a way to group those together for an implementation?
Yes and no. I think that could be something that, when we look at early next year and we start to, what do we want to look at? Those are plans that we have put together that are good ones to reference. And like Grant mentioned earlier, it's not one singular document, it's kind of a collection of documents. That's how we see it going into the implementation application is here's our main safety plan, but here's whether it's stuff that's already completed, plus stuff that we're able to do over the next 12 months that kind of supplements that. So yes and no. I think it could be a part of it and then bolster the application next fall. I don't think anything that's planned and studied already would be excluded from an application. I think it would want to be better. If you guys agree.
Yeah, no, I think that's effective.
Yeah, and I think that kind of goes back to what Grant was saying before is that, those implementation asks are looking for themes. So if the outcomes of those safety studies identify themes that are recurring in different locations, we can build that into an application and address those problems regionally. If there's, a pedestrian focus that comes out of all of those separate safety studies, or if there is angle crashes that can be addressed with low-cost implementation efforts, that'll just bolster our kind of regional collaboration and show that we're looking at common themes and working together to find those solutions.
Yes.
This is a question of equity. If you have specific intersections or corridors that you're looking at that might not be located in a disadvantaged census tract, but you can make a case that because citizens of nearby disadvantaged census tract travel through there frequently, would that be able to boast the fact that even though this might, like in Niles, the kind of the south half of the city is disadvantaged while the north half is not, but our corridor plan is kind of for the north part of the city. Could you make those type of arguments that even though these bad intersections or bad corridors are not located in disadvantaged census tracts, they will still be able to impact the citizens of those?
Absolutely, because the way that we need to look at it and with everything we do, I referenced stuff with our MTP earlier, with our TIP document, all the projects, everything, that's what we want to look at. So we're not just looking at a project that's occurring in that census tract, but exactly what you're saying is if those folk are going from point A to point B and they're traveling through this census tract that's not standing out as high minority or low income, but that's where they're traveling, those projects, what type of positive or negative impact are they having on nearby census tracts as well? So yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and there's some data analysis tool. Grant has some cool maps he's pulled up where, it uses streetlight data that pulls from your cell phones to see, you know, at this grocery store, where do people come from? What's the market radius or commute patterns, that type of thing. So we can quantify that too, and it could be part of the assessment.
And just in case anybody's lost, Justin Mondock here, just since we introduced the three of us and he just kind of sat up here. We wanted to bring the facial hair in a little bit more, but no, he's our interim planning director. He'll be taking over for Joanne in January. So as a big planning aspect here, just so you're not wondering who's this guy that's answering the question and talking. So.
See, I just want to clarify what Brian was building on. So the implementation grants are also going to be a regional middle of several projects.
Correct.
And we each put in our 20% share or whatever, and at the end of our construction.
That's how we anticipate doing it.
Are those shovel ready projects where the plans are done, or can that be used to start the design work?
Yeah, design and preliminary engineering design is eligible as part of the implementation grant. So it doesn't have to be, you know, final plans done or keep done.
We have 3 or 4 projects that already have safety applications or safety plans done. Would it be worthwhile to put a project together this year to throw our hat in the ring?
They're looking for a comprehensive safety action plan. So not a corridor specific, not like an ODOT highway safety study, but something more regional that says these are your top 5, top 10 projects. And then it has a whole bunch of criteria and engagement levels. And again, that's why we didn't feel we could do a save as on the Eastgate plan, even in time to pull something together. It's pretty specific. Grant knows all the details. He's the master of it. But like the equity lens is a big one. It's really going to require some engagement and data analysis.
And a lot of it for us came down to the fact that we felt like our plan's mostly there. We might be able to fix those few issues internally in time to turn around and meet with people, get the projects, get that money together. But with the fitting it in there, it always comes down to the fact that maybe we don't actually meet that criteria and then it doesn't count for us anyways. So it seemed like we'd be better off with that full plan and not have that risk, plus get a better plan out of it in the long term.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit more on the supplemental activities portion of this? Is that something that's going to be part of the application for September 15th that you need input for, to have thoughts on supplemental things? And is it supplemental between planning and implementation?
Yeah, it is in between. And, you know, Emil can touch on it a little bit more, but that's stuff that I think we can broadly talk about in our application. But if there's feedback now that we specifically want to look at this, kind of answering the same that kind of Ernie was getting at. Yes, we specifically like to look at sidewalk issues in the 2 counties. Then that's something that we could put in there that, hey, this is what we would like to do with the supplemental action dollars. But we don't have to be specific unless I'm misspeaking here.
Yep, no, I think that's an accurate statement.
Yeah, so yeah, you're correct on your timeline that stuff that will occur. We can't do it before assuming award. We can't do it before we're awarded the funds. Money's not retroactive, can't be paid back. So assume we are successful, awarded funds, go through grant agreement process. Once we get through that, that's when we would start any supplemental action work.
And supplemental would have to be also regional in concept, or
I think the idea would be to take the comprehensive safety action plan, identify those, 10 priorities, 5 priorities, and then for those projects or program of projects, flesh these things a little bit out as far as project readiness. So that application, big thing, cost, logical termini, phasing, those type of things. So that we have a strong capital request. And, design will follow as part of that capital request unless, to Bob's point, somebody has a shovel-ready project. If that fits the criteria, it can certainly be packaged in. Maybe there's even match that to contribute.
Okay, I think this was a great discussion. We got a lot of good feedback, a lot of good thoughts here. Again, we've got the board there. We're forcing anybody into it. We know everyone starts to get nervous when they're forced into any breakout sessions or anything. But we're leaving it there. Write your ideas. Shoot us emails, give us calls, whatever it be. We're all going to be here the rest of the day throughout the lunch period. Pizza's here over in our other conference room. Please help yourself. And again, any other follow-up questions, comments, get it back to us. Thank you.
I did have one extra additional thing I wanted to bring up, which is we've talked all about how this is the comprehensive safety plan for this big funding source out there. But there are a lot of other safety funding sources, a lot of other stuff that gets brought in. And when it comes down to ODOT putting out their highway safety improvement planning come up, this still is going to be a plan that will still be used for doing that type of stuff. And this plan is still going to go into any other funding stuff you look at. It's not going to be just a plan for this this funding source. It's going to be our plan. So being involved will still help us, even if you'll not look at this, it'll still be helpful down the road for any other funding sources, keeping stuff on our radar and looking at the entire region all the time.
Right, that's a great comment, and kind of to emphasize it, I think kind of carries from what Gary was asking, with different community applications and projects. If something, and we don't know everything that's gonna come out from the IHA, something else comes out, this is just gonna look good as hey, you looked at this, we looked at that, we have this study to reference, so. It's not only gonna help for an application next fall, it's gonna help for everything beyond. Yep, good comment. All right, enjoy the pizza, save some for me.